Good afternoon and welcome to our panel discussion for Life Interrupted, a documentary film featuring empowering stories of breast cancer survivors told through the survivor's perspective. My name is Elizabeth Roth and I am the Be Well at NPL Program Coordinator at the Nashville Public Library, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. As you entered the Zoom platform, you were muted and will continue to be muted throughout the event. To engage with our interactive panel, please use the chat feature. Throughout today's discussion, we will continuously monitor questions and comments from the chat feature for our panelists to respond to. Our panelists will respond to as many questions as they can during our time together, but we regret not all questions may be answered due to time constraints. Closed captioning will be available for today's program, which you can activate by clicking the CC icon on the toolbar. If you need assistance or have any technical issues, please contact our team through the chat feature. At the end of today's program, you'll be directed to our online survey. We hope you will share your thoughts on the program to help us improve. We will be recording the panel discussion and posting the recording on NNLM's YouTube channel. We will share a link to the recording to all event registrants within 1 week. Before we get started, we have a quick poll for our audience joining us through Zoom webinar. We're curious how you heard about this event. Was it through one of our partner organizations or perhaps one of our panelists? We appreciate your feedback. Thank you to everyone who responded. Nashville Public Library and Greensboro Area Health Education Center, called the Greensboro AHEC, are proud to be partnering with the network of the National Library of Medicine and filmmaker and breast cancer thriver Paula Mozen to offer a virtual film screening and today's panel discussion to increase awareness and understanding of the broad impact of breast cancer in communities that have been and continue to be underrepresented in medical research. To connect precision medicine and medical research with finding cures and treatment of breast cancer, and to increase awareness of health information resources provided by the National Library of Medicine and the National Institutes of Health All of Us Research Program. To tell you more about the All of Us Research Program, I would like to introduce Angie Gonzalez to share what the All of Us Research Program is and how it can help your communities. Welcome, Angie.
Hi, Elizabeth, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Angie Gonzalez, and I'm with the National Institutes of Health All of Us Research Program. And I would like to thank the network of the National Library of Medicine and the Greensboro AHEC and Nashville Public Library for having us in this exciting discussion about the life-interrupted film, breast cancer, and the impact it has on all of us. During my presentation, I'm going to discuss a little bit about what DNA is, what researchers can learn from it, and what the All of Us Research Program is, and how improving the future of health can start with you. So what is the All of Us Research Program? It's a historic longitudinal effort, hopefully lasting for 10 years or more, led by the NIH to help researchers understand more about what makes people sick or keeps them healthy. The goal is for 1 million or more people living in the US to volunteer and provide data that may help accelerate research and improve health for generations to come. The program aims to engage a community of participants that reflects the diversity of America, including many people who haven't taken part in medical research before. To date, over 378,000 people have joined, and our goal is to get to 1 million or more. So Elizabeth mentioned precision medicine. What is it anyway? Precision medicine research considers the things that makes each and every one of us unique. It's also a fancy way of saying research on healthcare tailored to you as an individual. It focuses on The differences in our environment, like where you live, lifestyle, like what you eat, and biology, your genes and family health history. And by studying these differences, researchers may find patterns, and this may improve health for everyone. So DNA and genes, what are they? DNA is the material that makes up genes, and genes carry information that determine our traits like hair color, eye color, the risk of developing some diseases. Half of your DNA came from your biological mother, and the other half came from your biological father. Your DNA is 99% the same as everyone else's. The tiny amount that's different is what makes each of us unique. You may have heard about a breast cancer gene or a baldness gene. These terms aren't quite accurate. There aren't genes for specific diseases. Rather, changes in genes are sometimes linked to certain traits or diseases. Even one small DNA change in a gene can affect the processes in our bodies and can sometimes cause health problems. These changes can happen for a variety of reasons. Some happen by chance, and others are passed down through our families. So what can researchers learn from the information that all of us is gathering? Well, they'll identify what makes people more or less likely to develop a disease, find out how environment, lifestyle, and genes can impact health, identify which treatments work best for different types of people, create medications to treat or prevent common conditions such as chronic pain or diabetes, and build better tools for detecting health conditions and encouraging healthy habits. Now let's chat about something that's important to all of us, our data security and privacy. Your privacy and data security are very important to us, and we'll protect your DNA information in the same way we protect the other information you share with all of us. Your identifiable information, like name and address, are stripped away from your samples, and you're assigned a unique code. The survey and all personal information are kept safe on an encrypted server with limited access. And remember, participation in all of us is voluntary, so you're free to share as much or as little as you feel comfortable with, because all information is valuable. So now you're probably wondering, well, what's in it for me? Well, it's simple. You'll contribute to research that may improve health for generations to come. By participating, you'll get a chance to learn about your own health, including personalized risk factors or exposures. You'll get the ability and choice to access your own data, including increasingly rich health records, and an opportunity to ensure that your community is included in the studies that lead to new understandings and new treatments. Now, before I finalize my presentation, I just want to invite everyone out there to get out their phones and open up your camera or QR code reader. The blue QR code you see here is going to take you right to our website at joinallofus.org/connect, where you can learn more, subscribe to updates, or enroll if you're ready. We will also type the website in the chat so you can easily copy and paste the URL into your browser. And if you currently seek care at any of our healthcare providers that belongs to our network, you can scan the black QR code, which will go directly to joinallofus.org. And then I'll also type the link in the chat where you can find the healthcare provider locations within our network. Thank you all so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed learning about the All of Us research program. It is one of the largest active data collection efforts out there, and it needs you to help find answers to some of our biggest questions. So don't miss out on your chance to help change the future of health for all of us. Back to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Angie. Now, we hope you watched this powerful film and are ready to join an engaging discussion with our panel. With great pleasure, please allow me to introduce you to Colleen Campbell, today's moderator. Dr. Colleen Campbell serves as Director of Genetic Counseling Operations for the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, is a clinical assistant professor in the university's Department of Internal Medicine, and also serves as Assistant Director for the Iowa Institute of Human Genetics. Dr. Campbell serves as Secretary and Treasurer of the National Society of Genetic Counselors. She was bestowed the 2018 National Society of Genetic Counselors Strategic Leader Award.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It is definitely an honor to be part of this amazing opportunity. We are all daughters, mothers, sisters, wives, and friends, and so many of us do not know about the importance of being involved in biomedical research. And our job, my job, is to provide information for people to learn and advocate for themselves, like the courageous women featured in this film, Life Interrupted. As the daughter of a breast cancer survivor and a genetic counselor, I was in awe of their drive to combat cancer head-on with all their might. Life Interrupted tells the story of how personal and varied breast cancer journeys are, and this is true for every health condition. This is why precision medicine is key in the future of healthcare and why all of us is committed to building a data set of diverse and individual health information that can hopefully impact future decisions in personal healthcare plans. During today's discussion, we will welcome the audience to ask questions, share experiences, and learn how research programs like the All of Us Research Program can accelerate medical breakthroughs for breast cancer by advancing precision medicine. We hope you will walk away with a better understanding of how the program can be a spark for positive change in research and why it is important that communities underrepresented in biomedical research have an opportunity to contribute to and benefit from health studies. Now, let's meet our amazing panelists. Our first panelist holds a PhD in cancer biology from Vanderbilt University and a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Duke University. Victoria Youngblood is a medical information health educator. Welcome, Victoria. We'd love for you to share a little bit more about yourself, particularly why you decided to focus on breast cancer care.
First and foremost, good afternoon. It's always an honor to be among these really strong and powerful women. And so thank you for having me here. You know, as a medical information health educator, a scientist, and a healthcare provider, my overall goal is always to provide women with the most accurate and unbiased education that I can regarding their breast cancer diagnosis, but not just their diagnosis, but also any questions that they may have regarding their treatment plans. And whenever I do this, I always want to base it upon the most up-to-date research, as well as the most up-to-date practice guidelines. And when I do this, what it's really about doing is empowering the woman, empowering the breast cancer patient. And this can happen in many ways. Not only can education empower a woman personally, but it can empower an individual as being a consumer of health, and also more importantly, being a self-advocate during this process and journey. And so when it comes to why I chose to study breast cancer, it really was a natural fit because of my desire to encourage and empower women, as well as my interest in the biological pathways associated with this disease. And, you know, one thing I really want to emphasize and just say is how excited I am to be discussing today about the concept, practice, and progression of precision medicine. It's really come a long way, and we are continuing to grow this field as demonstrated by the All of Us Research program. So I'm beyond that, you know, we see a lot of these themes throughout the film, and I'm really excited for us to have discussions about how these interact. So thank you again for having me here today.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. I love that, empowering women to be self-advocates. It's really a great theme, and I think you see that throughout this film as well. So our next panelist is a nonprofit marketing maven by day and a breast cancer baddie by night. Jasmine Sars is co-founder for The Breast of Us, the first inclusive breast cancer community for all women of color. Jasmine, thank you for joining us today. Could you tell us a little bit about your cancer journey?
Absolutely, and I'm so excited to be here again with all of these amazing women today. So I was diagnosed at 26 and December 30th, 2016. So right at the beginning before a new year. And when I was diagnosed, I remember thinking this next year is going to be horrible. And it was definitely challenging. It definitely came with its set of trials, but also a lot of triumphs because it really helped me grow in so many ways. On my breast cancer journey, I recall so many moments of feeling like an outsider, both as a young woman and as a Black woman. And all of these experiences really helped me to understand the importance of self-advocacy, being misdiagnosed initially. I learned about the stark disparities for women of color, like the mortality rate for Black women. And I learned about the barriers that women of color face in terms of accessing quality healthcare. And so I went from being a patient to being a patient advocate. And so I'm super excited to share that experience with everyone here today.
Great, thank you, Jasmine. And I think, you know, access is really critical, and we saw that in the film, and I'm excited for us to talk about that a little bit more today as well. So last but not least is Paula Mozen, Director of Life Interrupted. She is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, educator, and PBS consultant who is a two-time breast cancer thriver. Paula, Life Interrupted is a phenomenal, transparent journey about breast cancer and the courageous women who fight it each day. Why was it important for you to make this film?
Well, thank you for having me here, and I want to echo the other panelists. It's really a pleasure and a delight to sit on a panel with all these wonderful women. So thank you all for coming today. So I was a documentary filmmaker way before I was a breast cancer survivor. And I knew the power of authentic storytelling and how transformative a film could be for an audience to experience. So moving on to my first diagnosis, like most of us, when this happens, my whole world pretty much blew up. I was hit with my own mortality, and I was scared as hell. I experienced the onslaught of getting all this new information that was cloaked in confusing scientific terms that I had no idea what they were. And the feeling that I better learn fast and make substantial decisions in a very short period of time. And that knowing that these decisions were probably going to affect the rest of my life, however long that was going to be. And I thought at the time that I was alone in this experience, even though I knew that 1 in 8 women in the United States will be diagnosed with breast cancer in her lifetime. But when it happens to you, it feels very scary. And at least for me, I felt extremely alone. As time passed and things got more intense and more dramatic, the filmmaker part of me thought, maybe there is a story here that I can tell and share with other people. I started with 2 ideas: that one size does not fit all, and that breast cancer does not discriminate. However, as we all know, access to health care can be very discriminatory. So I took those 2 ideas, and that was sort of launched me on the journey of making the film. I wanted to make the film that I wish I could have seen when I was first diagnosed. That was maybe the most underlying motivation of this whole process. I wanted to share stories of women who had traveled this road before and include all aspects of diagnosis, treatment, the psychological, the physical, medical information, and life after cancer. I think for so many of us, we work so hard to get to that, what we think is the finish line of getting through all our treatments, and then we're hit with, okay, now what happens? And that's really when a lot of stuff starts to roll. It's a long-term process. It's an ultra marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's an ultra marathon. So I would say, you know, in closing, those were the main things that motivated me to decide to go on the journey of making this film.
Great, thank you, Paula. So many great messages in there, and I think, you know, we'll start to unpack some of these as we go on. So I'm going to start off with a few questions for our panel, but I encourage our audience to submit their questions, comments, and stories in the Q&A feature. So we're going to continue with Paula here. And, you know, I really love the one size does not fit all and cancer does not discriminate. And you also mentioned that this is you made the film that you wished you could have seen when you were first diagnosed. And so leading from that, what are some of the key messages that you hope women who are newly diagnosed with breast cancer walk away with after watching your film?
That's great, and hopefully this happens. And I just want to say that having dialogue like we are having here is probably one of the most important things that can happen, because I think as a filmmaker, I want to share people's stories, but I want people to be able to take those stories and then place them on their own lives. What's important to you? You know, one size does not fit all. So just to bring these out into the open and then have an opportunity for things to be discussed. I think breast cancer for so long has been in the shadows. It's not an easy disease. And I think many of us see the media as putting it on as, you know, pretty pink balloons. And that's not exactly what it is. I would say for survivors and also for their family members and also healthcare providers, I have different takeaways that I would like for people to get. The first thing is to orient people to the authentic experience of breast cancer, that it is a harsh reality. And at times it's not neat and tidy. It's not, you know, it's not an easy, we start at A, we go to B, and we end up at C. There's, you know, different hills and valleys along the way. And, you know, sometimes we kind of fall off the track. We get sidestepped by different things that come up. I want to validate survivors' experiences. That's really important to me for survivors, for them to feel that they're not alone, for them to feel like whatever their experience is that it's valid, and that it's valid and important for them to acknowledge and share their own authentic experiences. I would say one of the greatest joys that I've had is when I've been to film screenings back before COVID, and people would come up to me and just tell me how meaningful this was. And it wasn't necessarily easy for them to watch, but they felt empowered by seeing some of their experiences, you know, on the big screen, and allowed validation for themselves. As we've sort of mentioned earlier, to empower patients to be proactive in terms of their own treatments and decisions, to ask questions, get support, and make the best decisions for your situation. You know, I think that's so important. Sometimes we go into the medical sphere and just want to be told what to do. And I really think breast cancer is not that type of situation. I think you really want to be in collaboration with your providers. I want to help providers to treat the patient, not the disease, to remember that we are people with 360-degree lives, and we want to be treated as human beings and not just as, you know, charts and notes and things like that. And finally, I think it's really important, you know, I'm sure Jasmine has had this, I know I do, where people want to know, how can I help my friend or my family member? And so I want to give family members and advocates and friends an idea of what going through breast cancer is really like. And hopefully then this will help them be better advocates and supporters for their friends and loved ones. So I would say that's some of the takeaways I hope that people can get.
Yeah, I think that it's really important, you know, that there's not a clear path, and each person, you know, has their own path, and that kind of resonates with the All of Us program and precision medicine, and you know, treating the patient and not as opposed to treating the disease. And so as a genetic counselor, I can really appreciate this empowerment to make decisions, as that's something we're trying to do. And I think, you know, that's really clear when you watch the movie, and especially that collaboration piece, and that you're on the team with your providers, and really equal voice in that. So I'm going to go on to Jasmine. And Jasmine, I want to ask you, what inspired you to co-found For the Rest of Us, the first inclusive breast cancer community for all women of color?
So It was a little bit of personal experience and necessity. I think a combination of both. I remember going to look for what images of mastectomy looks like and not being able to find images of Black women. The same thing with radiation. I remember like going to try on wigs when we were in this little bit of an indecisive period for chemotherapy and not being able to find wigs that were in my texture. And the lady was like, just hold the swatch up to your head. And it felt so dehumanizing in a way, like it felt like she just didn't care. Like, this is a big moment. I have to cut up off my hair, and I don't know if people really have an understanding of how when you're doing your best to not feel and look sick, and cancer strips away all of those things, it's really hard to not look sick. So there was all these moments where I was like, man, there's nothing really out there for me as a young woman or as a Black woman. And the first place I went to was really social media. And that's where I found Young Women. And after finding Young Women, I still wanted to find more Black women, more women of color. And so I went to a conference where I was connected with other young women, and then I started really learning about the research side and more of the advocacy side of breast cancer. And I started to learn about the health disparities for women of color, learning about the mortality rate for Black women being 40% more likely to die from breast cancer than their white counterparts, learning about how Latinas are more likely to have larger tumor sizes and more likely to be hormone receptive, or less likely to be hormone receptive. And so you start to learn about all these challenges, and you start to couple that with not being able to find people that look like you or represent your community, and it starts to feel really stark. It starts to feel like, is no one surviving this? Why can't I find people out there that look like me? And so when we originally started For the Rest of Us, my partner Marissa and I, our first goal was to just create a space where we could share stories and imagery of women of color. And then once we started to grow, and we did this in 2019, so we've only been around for a couple of years, getting ready to celebrate 2 years in next month. Once we started to grow, we really realized the power of our platform to not just share these personal stories, but to also create an opportunity to educate a community as thought leaders, as advocates, as patient advocates, and to also create a space where recognizing what our privilege is as advocates in our different locations and having access to all these experts, we now have the privilege of being able to educate women on how to navigate their experiences better. We are not in a place where we can change the system, but we are in a place where we can teach women how to navigate the system better, how to cheat the system, how to make sure the system is working for them. And that's really our goal at For the Rest of Us, to help women make the rest of their lives the best of their lives after a breast cancer diagnosis, looking at everything from career and family to relationships, parenting, all of that. And it's been an incredible journey the last couple of years.
Yeah, really getting at that whole person and all, like I think Paula said, the 360 degrees of a person as opposed to just their disease,
Absolutely.
which is really phenomenal.
And I just want to add one thing. I think that Jasmine is such an amazing survivor and thriver, and I'm so in awe of what you do to give back to your community. And I have to say that I have met a lot of survivors, in different realms who this is what they want to do. I mean, breast cancer survivors just seem to be, some of them are incredibly generous people. And it's just so touching to me that, you go through these pretty intense experiences and you want to help the people that are coming after you. So I thank you for the work that you do. And also I just think that's so interesting.
I agree. I heard of For the Rest of Us before this, and so I was really honored and excited to see that Jasmine was going to be participating today.
Thank you, ladies. And Paula, to you, and I'm sitting here writing notes because my brain is always all over the place as you talk. And when you talk about creating the film you wish you would have seen, I remember the first time that I watched it. At first, it was like, oh, triggered, because you're reliving so many of these experiences. But then I also, like you said, I appreciated the authenticity so much, because like you said, that the after treatment is really the hardest part. And there is no guide for that. And the doctors, I don't think they really have an appreciation of how difficult that offboarding process. There is no offboarding process. It just stops and you have to pick up the pieces. And I appreciate it so much. And I told you this before, just how honest you were, even about how you felt about your body, about how everyone had to learn how to advocate for themselves. Those are things I wish I would have seen and learned when I was first diagnosed, because I think it would have given me a more realistic expectation of what life after would look like, and maybe even life during would look like. This idea of failed reconstruction. I mean, all of us go through this and we're hoping for the best every time. And that's just not the reality. And when people aren't talking about those harsh realities, when people aren't talking about not being satisfied with the way their reconstruction goes, or the difficulty in getting back and forth to appointments, you know, it makes it seem like you're alone in the challenges. And that's why I continue to say that our stories are not our own. Our stories are absolutely going to be the guides to other people's journeys. And I appreciate the way that you laid it out in Life Interrupted.
Thank you. Yeah. Stories are so important, and, you know, and sharing them authentically, I think, because it becomes for all of us, and it creates, you know, ideas and hopes and possibilities for people beyond just yourself.
And especially within the film too, you really did a great job in showing the many dynamics of each of the three different women, you being one of them. For instance, with Pat Bear, showing that intimacy of her not being sure she really wanted her family to be involved with their care. And I think that goes to show another level of that complexity that the patients have. And you can't always like place judgment on that in this world, because you might say, well, why isn't this person being there? But culturally, that wasn't appropriate. Right. And I think it would not be right for her to have asked that of her son. And, you know, you're looking at Debbie and taking the considerations that she had to deal with fertility, being newly married and engaged, and then going on to have children and having a re-diagnosis. It really just demonstrated all the different components that people are living with. And I really appreciated too about that authenticity, but not just the authenticity, but that you peeled away many layers that people don't always get to think about, especially with younger women thinking about fertility and quality of life. And research is really doing a great job in, you know, targeting that and thinking about, you know, women live now for a long time. And we know that in, you know, in the next few years, there's expected to be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of survivors. And these are women, many of them young, that want to have children, that want to have families, and just want to grow old and be happy and feel safe and heard. And so I think seeing where everything is moving towards, I think, is a really positive light at the end of the tunnel. And it's great knowing that we're going in that direction right now.
Yeah, I absolutely think it underscores the importance of self-advocacy and personal definitions of what quality of life looks like. We're getting away from this idea of one size does not fit all. And I remember one time on these panels, someone said something about equal healthcare, and like we have to move away from we may want equal outcomes, but we want equitable healthcare. We want everyone to have what they need to get the outcome that they desire for their life. And I know even for me, being 26, 2 years into my marriage, it was actually the doctor's appointment where I was going in to start family planning, to get ready to have kids, where we start this roller coaster of what's really going on with this breast. And I want to understand what the impacts of hormone therapy would do to my body. And I remember the doctor saying, let's worry about the cancer first and kids later. Well, we could go down this line and there may not be a later for me. And so I definitely think, again, like underscoring this importance, and Deb went through that, understand the importance of what you want your life to look like after cancer, and holding your cancer care team accountable to that, I think, is very important. And I appreciate that perspective being shown as well.
Yeah, the end goal is being defined by you as opposed to by somebody else, and then having the other people help you figure out the path to get to that end goal. but working with you on that. So I just want to remind the audience, you can submit your questions and comments and stories through the Q&A feature, and we welcome all of those as well. So I want to play, you guys have touched on this a little bit, and we've heard some of the advice of, self-advocacy, but Paula and Jasmine, as survivors, is there anything you wish you had known either when you were first diagnosed that we haven't touched on yet, or even before you were diagnosed?
I think one of the biggest things for me before I was diagnosed was understanding that young women can and do get breast cancer. I don't have a genetic mutation, I don't have a known genetic mutation, but I do have a very strong family history of breast cancer. So my grandmother being a 2-time survivor, she's diagnosed metastatic now for her 3rd time. Several of her sisters have had breast cancer. We've had a cousin that died from breast cancer. And so no one as young as me, as 26. And I went through this entire process being told I was too young to have breast cancer. And the reality is that's just not a thing. There's no such thing as too young as breast cancer. I've heard women as young as 16 being diagnosed with breast cancer. And I can't imagine how difficult it is to be listened to as a 16-year-old when I was 26 and I had someone say, well, we're looking for horses, not zebras. And so I think one thing, having that understanding, even knowing my family history though, that helped me to start to look into maybe this is a little bit more than, and what I had initially had was breast pain and nipple discharge, but understanding that I did have breast cancer in my family, that did make me want to push a little bit more to get answers. And then I think the last thing for me was to understand that doctors aren't perfect. They are human and that mistakes do happen. Before I was misdiagnosed, I mean, I would have taken whatever my doctor said and like, that's it. After being misdiagnosed, I had a real appreciation for doing my own research, asking questions, and not allowing inconclusive results to be the end of the conversation, but to really push to have answers and to understand everything that was happening.
Yeah.
And I would add everything that she said. In terms of, I touched on this in the beginning, the information comes fast and furious, and it's not always straightforward. It's not only doctors make mistakes, but it's not a binary system. You do this or you do that. There's all sorts of, gray areas. So to understand that, to keep asking questions until you understand the answers, not to feel that you're stupid, which I know I would feel sometimes, but it's just how it is. You need to learn a lot, but to give yourself time to do that. In meeting Victoria in these panels, I want to say that I wish I had known someone like her when I was diagnosed. I think, searching out someone like Victoria, or a lot of hospitals have nurse navigators. And I think that these are people, I think, yes, you want to talk to your doctors, but doctors often are on really tight schedules. And, you don't have a lot of time with them. So you take the time you do have, but then you find other people that you can work through some of these questions and options and things like that. I get a lot of people that call me and just asking, I'll say, why don't you talk to your doctor and ask them, well, what if I do this or what if I do that? And some doctors are going to have the time for that and some aren't. So it's up to you as the patient to find people that can help you with that. And I think someone like Victoria would be perfect. So I would say that, and then don't make decisions. There is a time thing. You do want to make decisions in a timely way, but don't feel like you have to, rush. These are decisions that are going to be very important. They're going to affect the rest of your life. So, take the time you need and ask the questions. And then finally, just get a really good notebook that you can write everything down in, ideally something with sleeves and stuff, because people are going to give you all these handouts, and you want to keep all your information, you know, together and in one place.
Yeah.
So-
And just to speak to a couple of things, Paula, for young survivors, Young Survival Coalition has different binders for different aspects of your journey, for newly diagnosed, for survivorship, for metastatic. They have them also available in Spanish. So if you're looking for a good notebook with terminology and resources and all those things, questions maybe you should ask, they are an absolutely great resource. And then also speaking to the idea that everyone is different, community, I think, is very important. That's one of the community can help increase survivorship outcomes. And that's a big thing for the rest of us. But the other thing to keep in mind with community is how different everyone is. And sometimes it sounds like we all have the same thing, right? Everyone can be like, well, I'm hormone receptive and I'm hormone receptive, but you guys can have completely different treatments. You can make completely different options or treatment options, decisions. And I think that's important to keep in mind as we're engaging with community, to not expect all of our paths to look the same. Like you said, it's not binary. It's not like we have this little map that says, if you do this, you should do that. There are so many factors that determine the kind of treatment options that people can take or want to take. And I think that's very important as we engage with community, is keeping that perspective in mind.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. So I want to work in an audience question. And it's along, you know, we've been talking about the team and building your team. And, you know, Paula just touched on how she had someone like Victoria on her team to help her navigate. And so the question is, finding the right oncologist and healthcare treatment team is important, as it is needed for timely treatment. Can you discuss the important aspects of that balance and how patients, family, and friends and oncologists can be supportive?
I feel like the two of you have a lot of experience, but I could tell you what I tell clients that I work with that often have very similar questions to that. And what I try to remind them is that this is going to be a lifelong relationship. And this is something that we were talking about earlier together, is that it's not just a one time you meet somebody, you're going to be interacting with these individuals for a while. And so I think making sure that there is good chemistry and communication, and making sure that it's a good match. You know, just because you go to an oncologist and it's your first appointment, it doesn't mean you have to necessarily stay with that one oncologist. You can always decide to get a second opinion, which is 100% the right of every patient to do. And it's actually quite common. And so people are not offended by asking for a second opinion. And I think it's important to realize that, you know, family members, get them involved, make sure everybody is feeling comfortable and on the same page. If you have a healthcare provider that's not responding to your messages, it's not explaining, or he or she are not explaining in detail or to your satisfaction about a particular therapy option, I mean, that might not be a good fit for you. And I think at that time, it seems very reasonable to consider a second opinion or switching oncologists. I know for some individuals, they'll join support groups and as an early diagnosed individual. And at that point, they can talk to one another. And sometimes that's how some people discover who they want to do treatment with, either an oncologist or surgeon, depending on the type of cancer and the age of the patient. They may or may not be getting chemotherapy until they might get it before surgery or after surgery. And so just everyone that you're coming across, it's really good to ask who they would recommend and how people felt with their outcomes, and really just talking to your peers. There you have to have some caution in talking with your peers, as Jasmine was mentioning, because you know, everyone is very different and everything can have a different type of outcome and treatment options. But where you can talk to your peers about is the type of interaction that they had with their healthcare team. And that can be really informative, because I think that's where you're going to know whether or not that those individuals you're surrounding yourself with are going to provide you with that comfort going through a really difficult time.
Do you recommend that over just going online and checking? You know, you can look up doctors and get reviews and things like that. Do you have any any advice, Victoria, on just going further on picking your oncologist?
I'm not an oncologist, but yeah, I think that's always a good place to start, especially now in the era of everything being consumer based in many ways and a commerce based sense where everyone is writing reviews. That is a great place to start. And it actually, I can only imagine it holds people accountable as well. And so I do think that is a great place to start, especially for individuals that maybe don't know where to start in regards to support groups, or maybe they may not have peers to communicate and talk this over. I do think looking online is a great place to start in regards to reviews. And yeah, and I think also, again, thinking about what you're wanting. Some places are more comprehensive. So you might go to a more larger center that's comprehensive, and there you might have the surgeon, the oncologist, you might have physical therapy, dietitians, all there working together. And some people don't necessarily want that full level of support to some degree, and that's okay. Everyone's different. And so maybe if that's not what you don't need that, maybe one of the smaller centers could also be completely appropriate. And so I think looking at what services are offered is also can be very valuable for the patient.
Yeah, so kind of to follow up on that, Victoria, so we've talked about, like, there's, Paula mentioned there's an onslaught of information and having that notebook. And then you just mentioned a lot of different options for team members that can be joining you on this journey. And so what are your thoughts on, if you have a friend or family member, or hospitals sometimes have patient advocates, what are your thoughts on using those people? How do you select those people, their roles?
Yeah. Wow, that's a great question. The nice part is oftentimes you will be assigned a nurse navigator to help you really understand how to move from, when do I do radiology, or what's my timing before I have to have, from surgery to chemotherapy, and someone that you can really just ask questions to and get quick responses from. And so those are typically found among all breast cancer centers or oncology centers, because they do want to, as a whole, the healthcare community really does want to empower patients and provide them with information and knowledge. Depending on the size of the center and how specialized each group is, though, you may have someone who has little or more information regarding a particular cancer, such as breast. And that's where I think reaching out to different organizations like the Breast of Us, or finding individuals like myself that are wanting to talk to people and wanting to help them, I think that's really critical, and just being aware of that. And oftentimes your nurse navigator, your oncologist will be aware of different organizations in the region and area.
Great, that's really helpful.
And one thing I think that's important when you are choosing your caregiver, if you have the option to choose who's your caregiver, your co-survivor, I think it's important to have, not everyone is going to be qualified to be in that role. And I think that's just the truth of it. And I think a lot of us, especially the younger survivors, a lot of us talk about how we lose friends. I definitely did. And when I look at my oncologist, I look for someone that's going to make decisions with me, not for me. I look for someone that's going to give me information so that I can make the best decisions for myself. And you actually have to look for the same thing in your co-survivor. You have to look for people that are going to be supportive of your decisions, with an understanding that your decisions aren't always going to make everyone else happy, but you have to do what's best for you. So I just want to throw that out there in terms of when you're building your team, because your co-survivors are part of your team, making sure that you have people that are going to be supportive of what you choose for you is very important.
It's a really good point. And that I never thought about it like that. Your co-survivors are also your team. And that's so true.
Yeah. So we have another question from the audience, and it's, what advice do you wish your family, partner, or friends were given at the start of your treatment that would have helped them be both mentally healthy and supportive?
So I was married when I went through breast cancer. I'm divorced now. I'm divorced at the end of last year. I think cancer is one of those things. I think it'll either be the glue or it'll be like the Thor hammer. It'll shatter some things. But my mother was my closest co-survivor, my closest caregiver during that time. And I think one thing that would have been great for really all of us is this idea that it's okay to not be okay. I remember like going in for my mastectomy, like boohoo crying and getting to the hospital and trying to clean up my face so my family wouldn't see that I was crying. And then finding out later that my mom was basically the same way. Like my mom was a strong face in front of me and she was crying in the waiting room. And I think sometimes we have that burden of trying to protect the people around us that we don't really allow ourselves to feel the gravity of what's happening. And it's hard. And so I think that just that freedom of like to feel how you feel and to understand that it's not going to be sunshine and rainbows even after, because people think that afterwards like it's ringing bells and we're happy-go-lucky. We really go through a lot of grief. And I think survivors should be allowed to process that grief. And I think our co-survivors should give us space to process that grief. And that doesn't always happen.
And I just want to add to that, that, the process of, you hear in a phone call, your life changes in a few seconds, right? And then you just kind of, everything shuts down and then you're just focused on what do I have to do to get through this thing? And I've thought about this a lot. I'm sure I'm not the first person who's mentioned this, but I felt like it's sort of a PTSD situation.
Yeah.
You get the diagnosis, you get into this, fear or flight, or you know what I'm saying? I don't know.
Fight or fight.
Fight or flight. Yeah. You get in the fight or flight mode. You just you focus in, you do this stuff, and to a part where the reason I wanted to follow up with what Jazz was saying is that sometimes you might even be hiding your feelings or putting them back because you just want to get this stuff taken care of. You want to do it right. You don't want to mess around with feelings. And then when it's all taken care of, that's when the whole floodgates can open up. And that's how I feel like can be kind of like PTSD, where the trauma and the after effects of all those things finally have a chance to kind of express themselves. And I think that's, you've got to do that or you don't move forward. And I think knowing that as a survivor and also as a co-survivor, I think would be very important.
And when you said that, it kind of gave me chills. I was doing a conversation about like proton therapy in my experience. So because I didn't do chemo, proton therapy was the end of active treatment for me. Mm-hmm. And I was explaining to people how I cried in the beginning of my diagnosis, and then I had some bad days that weren't really related to my diagnosis in the middle. But it was the last day of proton therapy treatment where I remember laying myself on the table and trying not to really ugly cry, because it did feel like I had been running this marathon and suddenly it's I can breathe. It's really survival mode. And then it really is at the end of active treatment where all of those emotions hit you and you're really trying to figure out what just happened to my body, what just happened to my family.
What the hell just happened?
Okay, exactly. What happened to my finances? Everything is blown up. And I do want to just encourage people, because I'm thinking about the co-survivor aspect of this. For the rest of us, we do a monthly chat called Baddies Talk Back. And in November, we did a conversation with co-survivors, and it was very special. We had co-survivors that were parent and daughter, husband and wife, mother and daughter. It was beautiful. And it actually gave everyone to talk about those things that maybe co-survivors don't really get a chance to talk about. And that can be found on the For the Rest of Us YouTube channel if you're interested in seeing the co-survivor aspect of navigating breast cancer diagnosis.
That sounds like a really great resource, Jasmine. So I'm going to change directions a little bit on us. I think as a geneticist, I would be remiss not to ask a question. So Victoria, do you want to talk a little bit about how Paula's illustration of her family tree and her ancestry helped explain why she might have been prone to breast cancer, and take us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. as the geneticist here, Dr. Campbell, it is a little intimidating trying to answer this in front of you. However, one of the reasons why I think demonstrating that family tree, Paula, was so important is for two reasons. We do know that if you do have a family history of women with breast cancer, not even just breast, colon, melanoma, pancreatic, and prostate, you're at increased risk of developing breast cancer in your lifetime. And because of Paula's heritage, her Ashkenazi Jewish heritage, we know that she was also at increased risk of having some inherited factors, including the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene mutations. And if she would have had those mutations, that would have increased her overall risk in general. And that would have, and we would know that not only would we potentially treat that slightly differently, it would maybe play a role in understanding your overall risk and reoccurrence later on, and maybe how they might move forward and with a few other treatment options. And so when you demonstrated that family tree, it really highlighted that, you did have a strong family history of breast cancer, but then you didn't have this known hereditary genetic factor. And it goes to show that there are a lot of genes, potentially a lot of genes that might be inherited that we just haven't discovered yet. Because the reality is the majority of individuals that develop breast cancer don't have a family history or don't have that young member of in their family that were diagnosed young. And I think that's why programs actually just like the All of Us research program are so critical, because we're trying to dive a little bit deeper and trying to understand other factors that may be playing a role, whether that be environmental or potentially, discovering a new hereditary gene that we just don't know about yet. And there are a number of risk factors. And I know you, Paula, you are very healthy and you are always active and you did all the things that quote unquote on paper are right to do to reduce your risk. And the reality is, in many ways you did reduce your risk, and we don't know, if you would have been diagnosed sooner and how those predispositions all work. However, again, showing that family tree really emphasized that just because you do have a family history or you don't have a BRCA mutation, it really only paints a small picture, and it's about risk. It's not about absolutes of yes or no. It's saying that you're at increased risk or you're decreased risk, but you're not guaranteed and you're also not safe from it. Not to make anyone to panic, but yeah. So Dr. Campbell, I don't know if that was a good enough answer for you.
Yeah, it was. And I'm seeing Jasmine. I want to give Jasmine a chance too, because I'm seeing her nodding along with this, and in listening to her, family history, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I hope, that you've had an experience to talk to a genetic counselor and kind of work through, like, what does it mean when you have testing and it's negative, but you have this strong family history like you described?
So I think the great thing about getting genetic testing done is whether or not you come back with a known genetic mutation. For one, you're on file. So let's say that it's not a mutation today. It could end up being linked in a few years down the line. The other thing is that the women or your family members close to you, like I have a younger sister, I have a mother that thank God has not had to deal with breast cancer, even though she's between my grandmother and I. It also gives them the information that they need to advocate for themselves and perhaps start screening later. So there's definitely value in getting the genetic test done, whether or not you have the mutation.
Great.
Yeah, and one thing I was going to add about that family history too, it's really important to you to, if you have, and you're going to see your healthcare team, letting them know, because they do recommend, well, some guidelines recommend that you start getting tested 10 years before earlier than anyone in your family has been diagnosed. So that means if someone in your family got diagnosed at the age of 45, guidelines do recommend that you actually start screening at the age of 35, for example. And so understanding that is also really critical, even beyond the biological component and just looking at that family tree and genealogical component.
So
Yeah.
Jasmine, I imagine your sister would fall in that category with you being diagnosed at 26.
Yeah.
So she's kind of on board or on alert.
You know what? I think one of the interesting things, and this can happen with getting the genetic testing done as well, is I think some people can be overwhelmed by information, and instead of empowering them, I think it makes them afraid. And unfortunately, I think she's falling into I don't want to think that it's a possibility, but unfortunately it is a possibility for us. And I hope that when people do get those tests, and when I encourage it, because for me, knowledge is power. And I mean, and when you have information, it gives you more options. And it's so much better to have the information before you need it than to wish you had the information and have options. I mean, decisions being made for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to get personal about your sister and you know, just I was thinking, but I think what's important is that I know people in my family, I won't name names, who, you know, would rather not know for those reasons. And on one hand, I have to respect them for their wishes. And on the other hand, I'm so like you, knowledge is power. And it just gives you more information to make decisions. You don't have to do anything. It stacks the deck a little bit better in your favor, in my opinion.
I share that opinion as well.
Yeah. And you know what, Jasmine, you also talked about, you know, just because there might be something that we don't know about yet. And when you do get genetic testing, they test for several genes. You know, people just think about the BRCA1 and the BRCA2, but there are many genes that we know are hereditary. I mean, there's also many that we know where these mutations occur, not in a hereditary fashion. And so getting tested is really great. And there are some that we know it's linked to an increased risk, but there aren't really any recommendations yet for them. But knowing that would be amazing, because then if later on in 5-10 years the recommendations come out, then you know, and then you have that power and you have that choice and you get to do that. But I can really appreciate why for some individuals having all this information might feel really scary, because that is a lot to hold on to in the event. And some people do wonder, like, well, am I just going to be anxious then, always wondering if I'm going to develop cancer? And I can appreciate that point of view. And then while knowledge is power, that also goes into that. What do you want out of your life, and what makes your quality of life right for you? Because if it's going to make you anxious and all you're going to be able to do is think about it, maybe this part of information isn't right for you then, right now, at least not right now in your life. And maybe you reevaluate that in a year or two, and think about what it is that is going to make you be the best version of yourself.
Exactly. And like the theme has been throughout having your own unique personal journey, and what does that mean? And at a minimum, you know, your family history is really important to know, and genetic testing may or may not be right, depending on what stage you are in your life. Well, ladies, I feel like we could keep talking and talking. I want to keep talking, but I also monitoring the time. So thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your stories and all your words of wisdom. I will now hand it back over to Elizabeth Roth for some final words.
Colleen, thank you for moderating such an engaging discussion. Victoria, Jasmine, and Paula, thank you so much for joining us today. To all of our audience members, we want to thank you so much for attending our Life Interrupted panel discussion. This program was made possible in partnership with the National Library of Medicine, the network of the National Library of Medicine, and the NIH All of Us Research Program. We want to thank the partners who have live streamed this panel discussion on their Facebook pages: Greensboro AHEC, Nashville Public Library, For the Breast of Us, Albuquerque Public Library, South Asian American Policy and Research Institute, and the AHEC Waco region. We hope you all enjoyed this program. Please share your feedback with us through our survey. A link is now available in the chat. Your responses will help us continually improve our programming. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day.